everyone! This is the introduction video for part 6 of our class and of our textbook, which covers 19th century Romanticism. This is my favorite time period in musical composition as far as listening and performing. While I do love them all, there's just something about this time period and the music that comes from it that I really enjoy. So Romanticism does not necessarily mean romantic love, although that is a very common theme through a lot of the pieces during this time. Romanticism was a cultural movement that stressed individuality, imagination, and emotion. So it was a reaction against the neoclassicism of the classical era and the Age of Reason, and it was a sometimes violent, sometimes overwhelming outpouring of a specific composer or performer's individual flavor and individual experiences, as well as the emotions they were feeling when they were creating that. So what Romantics sought to do was to encompass the whole human experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if someone was going through something that was very hard and very painful, they would write about it, they would write it into their music, as well as the stuff that was very happy. They were also interested in exploring fantasy worlds and dreams and all that sort of otherworldly experience. This is the time period when Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is being written, so that same sort of ideal of dark and fantastic things happening. So where the neoclassicists considered the Middle Ages to be the Dark Ages, and they weren't really huge fans of it, the Romantics were really attracted to that sort of dark literature that came from there, such as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a lot of the different stories that came from that time period. And in architecture, we see a revival in Gothic architecture. So buildings that were built in the 19th century start to look like buildings that were built during the Middle Ages, as opposed to the very symmetrical and simple buildings that we had seen during the classical time. The number one romantic influence, however, that seems to go through artwork, poetry, and music is the influence of nature and trying to capture natural elements in a piece of music or in a painting or throughout poetry. As far as Romanticism in music, many of the notable composers we're going to talk about reveal richness and variety of music, including how much it has managed to stay in our modern repertoire. The forms of the classical period are going to continue on, but they're going to be changed and altered a little bit so that it is constantly evolving. So some of the differences between classical and romantic music. Romantic music is going to have a larger range for tone color, for dynamics, and for pitch. So instruments are going to be playing louder, higher, softer, and lower, as well as making some interesting sounds they haven't made before. The harmonic language is a lot broader, especially because composers start to get influenced by early jazz and some world music, so some sounds from other countries and other genres start to influence the music. Romanticism is closely linked to the other arts, specifically literature and poetry, so you're going to see a lot of crossover between composers and different art forms into how they write their music. Romanticism is a strong emphasis on self-expression and individual style. Within the first couple measures of a piece of music, you would be able to recognize who wrote that piece of music because it would sound like that person. There's going to be a wide variety of emotions that are going to be explored. A lot of songs about romantic love are written during this time period, but oftentimes they're unhappy or they have substantial obstacles in front of them, so it gives a little bit of turbulence in this otherwise placid sort of emotion. There's going to be a fascination with the fantastic and the diabolical, so pieces that are inspired by things like witches and devils and anything along those lines that's a little bit outside of the normal aspect. So in addition to exoticism, which is other countries' music being explored in Western European music, there's also a rise in nationalism, which was a political movement at the same time in the 19th century that bleeds over into music, where composers would deliberately write pieces that they would naturally identify their national identity. So you would listen to a piece by this composer and go, ah, that sounds Russian, or oh, that sounds French, or oh, that sounds German. And how they would do that is they would use folk songs, dances, legends, historical events from their country, or natural landscapes from their country, and write pieces of music that would represent that. And it would contrast with the universally universal sound of European classical music. The main composers that we study during this time are composers outside of Germany, France, Italy. They're composers who come from Russia and composers who come from, say, the Czech Republic, some of the Eastern European countries as well. Program music is a new term we haven't talked about because it becomes very popular during the Romantic period. Program music is a piece of music that is associated, it's an instrumental piece, so there's no words inherently in it, but it's associated with a story, a poem, an idea, or even a painting, a scene, and it becomes very popular, and it's called a program piece because it usually comes with a paper program that you can read, and it tells you a little bit about the piece of music. So look for a lot of literature or folk legend or anything along those lines influences in most of people's music. The orchestra is going to grow incredibly large. So in the classical period, it would average about maybe max at 60 people. It's going to be about 100 people during this time. And so they start building larger concert halls and opera houses to fit all of these people. The piano is going to go through a revolution as well. The piano during the Romantic period went through a bit of a growth. It was all of a sudden made out of cast iron so that it could create more tension in the strings so that the piano would have more dynamic and singability to its melody. Also, the pedals that we have today on the modern piano are added during this time, so they have the ability to damper and to sustain pitches and chords. So there's more sounds that a piano can make. All of a sudden, dynamics become kind of crazy. You'll see pieces of music that have 4 fortes or 4 pianissimos, pianissimos in the music to really exploit all the different colors and tones that all the different instruments in the orchestra can do as in general. And forms are also going to be contradictory. So we'll have some composers that write immense pieces of music that last several hours to other composers who write miniatures, little teeny tiny pieces of music that last maybe a minute and a half. So composers will be doing all sorts of things during this time period. So how Romantic composers were living during this time, Beethoven's role as a free artist who didn't work for anyone inspired a lot of composers. So now they're seeking to please their contemporaries, to make money, to be able to have a living, but they're also seeking to write works that are going to last and stand the test of time. So we have more monumental pieces coming out of the Romantic period. After the French Revolution and the wars with Napoleon, a lot of aristocrats could no longer afford their own opera houses and orchestras and composers, so becoming a freelance musician in some ways became a necessity because you were not necessarily going to be given a post somewhere. Public concerts stay very popular during this time, but all of a sudden we have the rise of the subscription series. So being able to buy a season tickets to the orchestra happens during the Romantic period, and some of the symphonies that we have today find their birth during this time. So like the London Philharmonic, the Vienna Philharmonic, and the New York Philharmonic are all founded during this time period. So you can see that there's a lot of musical activity happening during this time. Most middle classes homes would have a piano in them, so there was a strong demand of pieces for piano accompaniment and solo instrument, either piano by itself or piano with violin or piano with voice. And all of a sudden composers come from the social class that is going to be their main audience. So they're not necessarily children of musicians anymore. A lot of them have parents that are booksellers, that are bankers, and it wasn't necessarily easy for a parent to let their child go into the realm of music anymore because it wasn't as dependable an employment as it was during the classical period. So in addition to composing, a lot of composers find themselves conducting orchestras, traveling and doing international tours as solo artists, teaching lessons, and a new thing that kind of pops up during this time is the musical journal. So we have a lot of composers who become musical critics, who write about new music and expose the world to new musicians. One of the new and distinctly romantic art forms that we're going to explore is the art song, which is a composition for solo voice and piano. And to the composer during the Romantic period, the accompaniment was just as vital a part as the vocal line. So it, in some ways, acted as its own character and interpreted the poetry just like the vocal line would. Although now today we perform art songs in concerts and recital halls, they were originally intended to be sung and performed at home in a very intimate sort of setting, like the chamber music that we explored during the classical era. Poetry and music come together into one, they fuse into one, and composers would typically set poetry in their native language so that they would best be able to use music as a vehicle for the text. The most popular country from art song during this time period is going to be Germany. The word Lied, L-I-E-D, is German for song. Lieder is German for songs. And that is where a bulk of the music is going to come from German Romantic poets and German Romantic composers writing art song. They're strongly influenced by yearning and despair and unrequited love and nature. Overall, art song is going to be a reaching out of the soul from a very personal, intimate sort of performance by the singers. And the mood is usually set with a piano introduction and with the piano postlude at the end. So look forward to that. We will be studying some art song in this time period, but know that like the fugue during the Baroque period, this is one of those things that really rises. It was around during the classical period, but it was not nearly as revolutionary or special as it was during the Romantic period, and this is where it really hits its stride. So I really hope you guys enjoy the next 2 weeks of classes. There's going to be lots of interesting music, lots of interesting stories, so please do the assignments, do the reading and listening, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks.